Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Michael Alexander and this is the first instructional video for the Incraria shawl. We've got it right here. It is a semicircular top-down two-color brioche shawl. You can see the shape a little bit better. And the finished measurements on this, once it's been fully blocked, you can see that this one's been blocked to the max, is 74 inches from tip to tip on the wingspan and 29 inches from the cast-on edge down to the I-cord bind-off. While we're talking about measurements, let's talk about gauge. On my unblocked swatches, my gauge for two-color brioche for this project on a number 4 knitting needle, size 4, US 4, is 20 inches wide, or 20 stitches wide, excuse me, and 24 rows deep for a 4-inch swatch of two-color brioche stitch. For the blocked shawl, the gauge is a little bit different. There are 12 stitches wide and 20 rows deep for a 4-inch section on the finished blocked shawl. While I've got the swatches out, I want to talk about the drawstring technique. Many brioche projects have a tubular knitting row to stabilize the edge after the cast on. This shawl does not use a tubular knitting row, and that is because after our shawl grows a little bit, we're going to take the dark colored yarn of our cast on edge, and if you give it a little tug, you can cinch on the stitches and pull them together as if they were on a drawstring. And that is how we are going to take our 5 cast on edge stitches and pull them to a clean point at the beginning of our shawl. So let's talk about yarn. This sample was knit in Madeline Tosh Twist Light. The colors of the light colored yarn is Havana and the dark colored yarn is Void. For our knit along sample, we'll be using 2 skeins from Stitch Together Studio. The base is Stitch Twisted Sock, and I've got Smelly Jellies for my light color and Wizard Robes for my dark color. You'll need 2 full 420 yard skeins of fingering weight yarn. If you have only 400 yard skeins, you run the risk of running out by the time you get to the end of your shawl. Our shawl begins with a 2-color Italian cast on, and if you have not done one before, or if you're a little bit rusty, we're going to go over it really quick. I've got some chunky baby alpaca grand from Plymouth yarn that I'll use that hopefully you can see a little bit better than the fine weight fingering yarn. So for a 2-color Italian cast on, we're going to start with a slip knot, leaving enough of a tail that you can comfortably weave in later. And we're going to pull a pretty generous loop just so that it won't come undone by accident. And we will take our needle in our right hand and place it under our knot, holding our tails to the side so that we don't work with them. I hold my yarn for the 2-color Italian cast on so that the light color yarn comes across in the front and the dark color goes in the back, and then I twist them on the bottom so that I end up with a light colored yarn in the back as if to knit and a dark colored yarn in the front as if to purl. I have them twisted around the needle like that just because it gives a little bit extra twist and a little bit more stability to your cast on edge after they get onto the cable of the needle. So holding the light colored yarn to the back as if to knit and the dark colored yarn to the front as if to purl, we're going to start with a light colored knit stitch and then move on to a dark colored purl stitch. And we're going to do knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl until we get to our last knit color stitch. And we'll do more of them than what the shawl is required just so you can see it. So beginning with our light colored knit stitch, we're going to bring the needle to the front and down, scoop the light colored yarn and bring it up to the top, and there's our first light colored knit stitch. For our dark colored purl stitch, we'll go to the back, down, scoop the dark colored yarn, bring it up to the top, and there is our dark colored purl stitch. Let's do that again. Knit stitch, front, down, scoop it, bring it to the top, light colored knit stitch. To the back, scoop the dark yarn, bring it to the top, dark colored purl stitch. To the front, scoop the light yarn, bring it to the top, light colored knit stitch. To the back, scoop the dark yarn, dark colored purl stitch. After we have enough stitches on our needle, we're going to end with a light colored knit stitch. You can see that if we just leave this by itself, this stitch wants to come undone. So to hold it in place, we're going to keep this previous stitch in place carefully and undo this stitch off the needle. Give it a little twist, put it back on the needle. So now we have a half hitch holding that last stitch in place. And this will be our final light colored stitch on the needle. So there we go. There's a two-color Italian cast on. Let's do it on our shawl yarn. So here we go. We've got our US size 4 knitting needle, and we've got our light colored yarn and our dark colored yarn. And we're going to start with a slip knot. That's a pretty good tail. All right, we've got our slip knot in place. I'm going to put my light colored yarn to the front, dark colored yarn to the back, twist them, so now I have light colored yarn to the back as if to knit, dark colored yarn in the front as if to purl. And we're going to start with the knit stitch. There's our first light colored knit stitch. There's our first dark colored purl stitch. Knit stitch, purl stitch, and a knit stitch. And that is 5 stitches on our needle. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this is just the 2 ends attached to the slip knot, which will come out later when we come back across the row. We're going to carefully undo our last light colored knit stitch, give it a twist, place it back on the needle, and now we have a half hitch to hold that final stitch in place. For the shawl, we are going to cast on 5 stitches using the 2-color Italian cast on method. And we're ready to head right into chart A of the pattern. Chart A begins with a setup row, so once our stitches are cast on, we can turn our work, and this is going to be the dark side of our work that our setup row begins on. I know it's a little bit hard to tell right now. So our setup row will be worked across once with our light colored yarn and then again with our dark colored yarn. So let's do the light colored yarn first, holding our tails out of the way. For our light colored yarn setup row, we're going to knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, purl 1, slip 1 yarn over, and purl our final stitch through the back loop. Careful not to split your yarn if you have a plied yarn or even if you have a non-plied yarn. So knit 1, bring yarn to the front so we can slip 1 purlwise and bring the yarn over. So there's our slip 1 yarn over, purl 1, yarn's in the front so we can slip 1, yarn over, and this final stitch we're going to the purl through the back loop. And the reason we're doing through the back loop is just to give that stitch a little bit extra twist and keep it in place a little bit better. So purling this final stitch through the back loop. And at that point we'll still have those 2 strands attached to the slip knot. We can just let all of that drop off the needle. I keep my slip knot in place until I have a little bit more size to my shawl, and then it can be pulled right out or left in place until the end when you're ready to weave in those ends. So we're not going to turn the work, we're going to slide the work back to the beginning of the needle so we can go across now with our dark colored yarn. So for our dark colored yarn setup row, we're going to slip 1 with yarn in the back, brioche knit, slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit, and then slip this final one with our yarn in the back. So we're going to slip 1, with our yarn in the back. And we are now ready to brioche knit this dark color stitch with its light colored wrap. There's our brioche knit. Bring our yarn to the front so that we can slip this next stitch and bring the yarn over. Here's the yarn over, slip one yarn over. And there is our next brioche knit. And after that brioche knit, our final stitch is a slip stitch with the yarn in the back. So slip stitch purlwise with the yarn in the back. And we, on our light colored yarn row, we slipped with the light colored in the front, and now our dark colors in the back, so now they're on opposite sides. And that is the setup row complete. We're ready to turn our work and begin row 1 of chart A. So row 1, now that we've turned our work, we are back on the light colored side of our work. Row 1 is going to be worked across first in the light colored yarn and then the dark colored yarn. So our light colored yarn is in the back, ready to knit. Our first row is going to be knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, a brioche 4 stitch increase, another slip yarn over, and then slip the final stitch with the yarn in the front. So let's dive right in. Knit 1, yarn to the front, so we can slip that one. There's our slip 1 yarn over, and into this center stitch is going to be our brioche 4 stitch increase. So we are going to knit, yarn over, knit, yarn over, and one more knit, all into the same stitch. So that's a 4 stitch increase. You can see where we've gone from 1 stitch to 5 stitches on that center stitch there. Yarn to the front so we can slip 1 yarn over our next stitch. Whoops, careful. And our final stitch we will slip with our yarn in the front. Do not turn your work, slide it to the beginning of your needle. We are now ready to work across row 1 with our dark colored yarn. So row 1 with our dark colored yarn. Our dark colored yarn is in the front. We're going to slip 1 stitch purlwise with the yarn in the front. Brioche purl, so that dark colored stitch together with its light yarn over wrap. And then we're going to slip 1 yarn over, purl 1. We're going to do that twice, so one more time. Slip yarn over, purl 1, so there's twice. One more slip yarn over, a brioche purl, and then we're going to slip our last stitch with our yarn in the front. So now both of these last stitches have been slipped with the yarns in the front, so both of our yarns are now in the front. We're ready to turn our work and begin row 2. So row 2 will be worked across first in our light colored yarn and then our dark colored yarn. And this second row is going to be word for word the same as the rest of our even numbered rows on our shawl. These are all going to be the rows on the dark side of the work. So once these 2 rows are worked, they are omitted from the rest of the pattern because all of the rest of the dark colored or dark side rows are the same. So row 2, light colored yarn, knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, burp 1, and then we're just going to continue to slip yarn over and then burp 1 until we get to the last 2 stitches of our work. Slip yarn over, burp 1, brioche purl, and we've got our final 2 stitches. We're going to slip 1 yarn over and slip the final stitch with our yarn in the front. We're not going to turn the work, slide your work to the beginning of your needle so we can now work row 2 with our dark colored yarn. So our yarn is in the back. We're going to slip with yarn in the back. Then we are going to brioche knit 1. Bring yarn to the front so we can slip yarn over. And then brioche knit, slip yarn over until the final 2 stitches. There's our final slip yarn over. And when we get to our last 2 stitches, brioche knit 1 and slip our next stitch with our yarn in the back. And so again, our yarns are on opposite sides now. We're ready to turn our work and begin row 3. And we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches on our needle at the end of row 2. So we have turned our work to our light colored side and we are ready to begin row 3. So row 3, light colored yarn. Yarn's in the back. We are going to knit 1, bring yarn to the front so we can slip 1 yarn over, and into this next stitch is going to be a birk yarn over birk, which is a 2-stitch increase. So brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all into that stitch. Slip 1 yarn over, and then we have another brioche 4-stitch increase. So brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all into that stitch. Now it's gone from 1 to 5. Slip yarn over, 1 more birk yarn over, birk, brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all into that stitch. And then a slip yarn over, and we slip our final stitch with our yarn in the front. There should now be 17 stitches on the needle. We don't turn our work, slide our work to the beginning of the needle so we can go across with our dark colored yarn. So row 3 for our dark colored yarn, we're going to slip our first stitch with our yarn in the front. Yarn in the front. We're going to brioche purl our next stitch, and then slip yarn over, purl 1, slip yarn over, brioche purl 1, and then a slip yarn over, purl 1 twice. So there's once, here's slip yarn over, purl 1 a second time, slip yarn over, brioche purl, slip yarn over, purl 1, slip yarn over, brioche purl, and our final stitch we will slip with our yarn in the front. We are now ready to turn our work to the dark colored side and do row 4, which is again the same as row 2. And I'll meet you at the end of that row. So here we are at the end of row 4. We're ready to turn our work and begin row 5. So row 5, we're going to start with our light colored yarn. Get our tails out of the way. And row 5, our light colored yarn row, is going to have a lot of increases happening. So we're going to start with a knit stitch, slip 1 yarn over, and then we're going to do a birk yarn over birk, a 2-stitch increase. So brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit into that stitch. And then we are going to slip one yarn over and then a brioche 4-stitch increase into that stitch right there, and we're going to do that 5 times across the row. So slip one yarn over. Here's our first brioche 4-stitch increase for this row. Yarn over, brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all into that same stitch. And then 4 more times. So slip one yarn over, brioche 4-stitch increase, there's our second one, slip yarn over, another brioche 4-stitch increase, another slip yarn over, another brioche 4-stitch increase, one more slip yarn over, and this is our final brioche 4-stitch increase. So there you can see we have our first 2-stitch increase, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 4-stitch increases across the row. One more slip yarn over, a final burk yarn over burk, so brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit into that stitch. One more slip yarn over, and we slip our final stitch with our yarn in the front. And that's going to give us 17 stitches. So we're not going to turn the work, we're going to slide back to the beginning of the row. And now we're going to do our dark colored yarn. So our dark colored yarn is going to slip the first stitch with the yarn in the front, and then we are going to brioche purl one, and then a slip yarn over, a purl one, and a slip yarn over, and then a brioche purl one, and for the 5-stitch increase we're going to slip yarn over, purl one twice, so there's the first one, slip yarn over, purl one, there's the second one, and a final slip yarn over. And we're going to keep doing that across the row. So brioche purl, and then a slip yarn over, purl one, slip yarn over, purl one, slip yarn over, brioche purl, slip yarn over, purl one, slip yarn over, purl one, slip yarn over, there's a brioche purl, slip yarn over, purl one, 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 slip yarn over, there's our brioche purl, slip one yarn over, purl one, slip yarn over, final brioche purl, and then we're going to slip our final stitch with our yarn in the front. We are now ready to turn our work and work row 6, which is again going to be the same as row 2 for the dark side rows. And if you're like me and you like to keep things consistent, when I have both of my yarns on the same side of the work and I'm about to do a dark side row, to keep things consistent, I always take my light colored yarn and bring it out from under my dark colored yarn. So when I go to knit, I bring that yarn up from under the dark colored yarn. And that just keeps things consistent up the side of the shawl. And that will twist your balls back and forth, so just keep in mind you'll have to be untwisting each time you do that. You'll notice by now that all of the edge stitches are going to be knit with the light colored yarn on the first pass and then slipped the rest of the time, so that we end up with a nice single colored selvage on the edge of our shawl. And you can see that on our finished piece. So you can see that light colored yarn just going up the side of the shawl. So now you should have everything you need to know to make it through charts A and B. I will post a video for chart C with the decreases in a couple weeks. In the meantime, I'm going out of town to attend Stitches West. So you'll be able to find me there walking around wearing my shawl. You can find me on Ravelry under Nacho DeGarvo. And I am on Instagram under the handle mikey.alexander.27. Thank you for watching. This is my first video. So I hope everything was clear. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below or find me on Ravelry or Instagram. Thank you everyone, and happy knitting!